February 25th, 1915, they challenged another of our batteries at the entrance to the strait. When they were shot once again, they preferred to withdraw. However, these batteries were severely damaged, no longer able to further resistance. Their mission was handed over to the batteries positioned in the inner strait. The bombs and nails dropped from the aircrafts impaired our soldiers, although air defense shots were quite successful, causing the expensive aircrafts of the British to fall. After February 25th, the Allied fleet perpetually postponed the collective attack on the strait due to unfavorable weather conditions. The cruiser named Nusret, under the command of Captain Tophaneli Hakkı Bey, laid 26 mines in the cold waters of the strait, all along the shore, during the night of March 7th and 8th. The British aircrafts and minesweepers would not notice them until the 18th of March. Admiral Carden, commanding the British-French fleet, later suffered from depression and was removed from his mission as he thought the possibility of a defeat was more likely to happen. He was replaced with his deputy, Admiral John de Robeck, who was a more passionate person. John de Robeck said in one of his telegrams to London that if the weather goes well, he was going to be in Istanbul in 2 weeks. In the course of all this, agents in Britain started to sell travel tickets for Istanbul. Banknotes that were to be used after the invasion of Turkey were minted, and minorities in Istanbul were preparing to host the British. The aircraft sent by Germany to the Turkish armed forces were positioned in the Dardanelles. Although there were still signs of German process on the planes, Captain Cerno came to the Dardanelles on March 17th to command these warplanes. Captain Cerno took off in the morning of March 18th for a test. In the meantime, the Allied fleet departed toward the strait. Captain Cerno's flight was so useful that all the weapons were put on alarm at the strait, and thus the Turkish army would not be caught unprepared. The Allied fleet was coming with all its glory. The large warships formed 3 lines, smaller accompanying cruisers, torpedo ships spread across the sea. The big day came and the big sea war started. The first line of ships entered the strait at 10:30 a.m. The pride of the Royal Navy was at the very front, followed by the Agamemnon, named after the greedy king of Greece in the legendary epic by Homer. And then came the Lord Nelson, the Inflexible, the Prince George, and the Triumph. They fired with all their power. The French fleet, which formed the second line, were the Goliath, the Charlemagne, the Bouve, and the Suvla entered the strait behind the British. The battle was becoming severe. The Turkish artillery only had 17 cannons against the 186 guns of the British-French Allied forces. It was an interesting competition between the naval artillery. Admiral John de Robeck, who commanded the fleet from the Queen Elizabeth, ordered the French to move to the front. The Queen Elizabeth did not only fire at batteries, but also civil targets in the city of the Dardanelles. The projectiles fired from the British guns opened cavities on the ground with a diameter as wide as 12 meters and 4 meters deep. Right in the middle of the heat of the battle, a British torpedo cruiser was shot and sank. With higher motivation, the Turkish side fired perpetually, raising water columns among the ships. However, there was also the concern that they could run out of arsenal any time. Not too much later, the Bouve was also shot and started to sink after lying on one side. The Turkish side stopped firing so as not to harm the French soldiers that fell off board the ship. The British stopped firing too for a while, but this interval did not last too long. Then, the British fleet came to the front and the French fleet moved back. The remaining British cruisers in the third line entered the strait. Their names were the Majestic, the Vengeance, the Irresistible, the Albion, the Ocean, the Swift Shore. After entering the strait, the Ocean completely destroyed Rumeli Mecidiye Battery and was looking for another target. Corporal Seed from this battery, in the face of the pierced courses of his friends, overflowed with an extraordinary power and lifted a projectile which weighed 215 kilograms and fired immediately. The Ocean was shot with a big explosion and sank in a few minutes after hitting some of the mines laid by the Nusret. The morale of the British soldiers was getting worse. The Turkish artillerymen, on the other hand, were in high spirits. The Agamemnon, which was under the risk of sinking because of the serious damage to its body, was the first ship to flee the strait. 3 more torpedo ships sank after they were shot. The Irresistible, which was coming for backing up the battleships in front, also sank due to the mines laid by Nusret within a matter of minutes. When the Queen Elizabeth started dragging away with the effect of the damage from the battle, the British completely lost morale. Then the Vice Admiral John de Robeck gave the order of withdrawal, bewildered with thoughts about the pride of the British Army and how he would account for such expensive ships. Toward the dusk, the victory belonged to the Turks. However, Churchill would not give up easily. He had given an order stating that they were going to pass that strait no matter how many ships and people it cost. The Allied forces, who understood that it was impossible to pass the straits from the sea, decided to make a land raid and continue their advance after having neutralized the artillery. After all, better late than never, as they say. To this end, they brought nearly 500,000 people from all over the world, 410,000 on the British side and 79,000 on the French side. In addition, the British formed a base in Egypt and transferred the soldiers they brought to the Gökçeada and Limni Islands. General Ian Hamilton was the commander, and they thought he was sure to succeed. The plan was simple. They were going to simultaneously disembark at 3 spots. When one of the groups distracted the Turkish soldiers, the others would take the peninsula under control. Accordingly, the French would be the bait and disembark at Kumkale. The Anzacs were going to disembark at Arıburnu, and the British at Seddülbahir. The Anzacs would take the Kocaçmen Hill, which was the highest and most strategic spot, whereas the British would take Alçıtepe Hill and control the area around Kilitbahir. In the meantime, the German general Lehmann von Sanders was assigned as the commander of the Turkish forces in Gallipoli. On 25th April 1915, they disembarked at 3 spots at dawn. The French disembarked at Kumkale. When they tried to advance under the backup fire of the French battleships, they were pinned to the coast by severe Turkish resistance. After some time, they had to withdraw. At the same time, the Anzacs disembarked at Arıburnu, and the Turkish troops were not unprepared. The Anzacs were having difficulty in proceeding on the steep hill. However, the Turks were few in number, and they ran out of ammunition in a short time. The regiment was withdrawing, for they had no ammunition left. It was a very critical moment of the war. The commander of 19th Division, Colonel Mustafa Kemal, intervened and asked the withdrawing soldiers, "Where are you going?" "The enemy is coming, sir. We have no ammunition left." "If you don't have the ammunition, you have your bayonets. Bayonets on! Lie down!" It was the moment we won. When the Turkish soldiers stopped withdrawing and lay down, the enemy also lay down. At that time, Turkish backup forces arrived. The Anzacs were pinned at the coast. Under the severe resistance, the Turkish troops were defending the area, heart and soul, in spite of the forceful fire of the ships. Again, at the same time that day, the British wanted to approach Ertuğrul Bay with the collier ship, the River Clyde, they nicknamed the Trojan Horse, because of the 2,000 soldiers hidden inside. They planned to neutralize the Turkish guards with a sudden attack, but there was an unexpected problem. They faced a great obstacle. Anyone stepping out was dropped dead by the fire from the Turkish side. As a response, the British Navy started a violent bombardment, and the ships started disembarking soldiers. The British soldiers who were not able to advance against a fierce defense were obliged to position on the coast. The obstacle they came across was Sergeant Yahya of Ezine and his 63 friends. Sergeant Yahya and his friends stopped the advance of the British forces, and this gave a day to the Turkish troops behind the firing line in order to form a line of defense. The British commander, Hunter Weston, had thought that they were fighting against thousands of people, and the cannonballs they fired at the hill amounted to 4,650. In the evening, when he learned the number of the Turkish martyrs on the hill, he could not hide his astonishment, and he was anxious until the end of the war. Disembarking at several spots in Seddülbahir simultaneously, the British and the French managed to position at the tip of the peninsula. As for the British Air Force, they did not only bombard the battleground, but they also bombarded civil residence areas, Çanakkale being the first. Mosques, even hospitals, and many innocent people were killed. The Turkish planes, which were very few in number, were bombing the British military targets and were doing all they could, along with fighting the British aircrafts. The battles ceaselessly continued night and day through April, May, June, and July around Alçıtepe in Seddülbahir region and in Araburnu. Neither the Turkish side could dispel the enemy, nor could the enemy advance. The floating castles and warplanes of the British would not leave the Turks alone. On the night of May 14, 1915, the Turkish torpedo boat Muavenet-i Milliye, commanded by the German officer Rudolf, approached the British warship Goliath, which was anchored in Morto Bay. They fired 2 torpedoes and quickly ran away. Soon, a great explosion lit the darkness, and the Goliath sank with its 570 personnel within minutes. On May 19th, before dawn, the Turks launched an attack to dispel the enemy. There were several students of Istanbul University among the thousands of martyrs. On May 25th, the British warship Triumph was patrolling the area between Kabatepe and Araburnu, prepared for attacks from land and sending showers of fire to the Turkish trenches. A torpedo from a German U-21 submarine buried the Triumph in the strait. On May 27th, the U-21 submarine, which made surprise attacks, caught the warship Majestic, a steel castle which was giving the Turkish side a hard time on the way to join the battle. London and Paris were really irritated. They could not manage to advance for months, and their losses were increasing. The British General Ian Hamilton had a final plan: disembark on Suvla Bay and take over Anafartalar. On August 7th, 1915, before dawn, the British Anzac army, strengthened by new soldiers, began disembarking on Suvla Bay with the support of naval artillery from the sea and British planes from the air. There were tired fighters before the British troops, proceeding both in Arıburnu and Suvla. The British also used poisonous gas against the Turkish troops. When Churchill was reminded that it was a shame for humanity, he replied that the Turks were not considered human. The British artillery was erupting death on the Turkish trenches. There were pieces of human bodies flying in the air. War was like a mill, grinding people. Every explosion was a tragic event to make those who missed the young men in the front cry. Do we know what it means to wait for a husband or a father ever to return, or a beloved son you miss so much, missing them for a lifetime? It was a time when the Turkish troops were withdrawing. The British were climbing Bayırı, and the end of the war was near. In the same places, the distance between the trenches was as close as 8 meters. Death was certain. What a devotion it was! What a reliance on God! Those who could were reading the Quran, and those who couldn't were praying and waiting for death. On May 10th, Anafartalar region's commander, Mustafa Kemal, started the general attack, saying, "I'm not ordering you to charge. I'm ordering you to die." The attack started at a time when there didn't seem any hope of defense. The soldiers had seen their friends die a few minutes ago. They knew that they too would die in spite of everything. They were running to their death, to paradise, to martyrs. Before such faith and determination, the British soldiers were about to give up. The victory belonged to the Turks. After that, the British tried a few attacks, all of which failed. Finally, the British Ministry of War yielded, and they decided to prepare for withdrawal beginning in the fall. When the last British ship left Bahir on January 9th, 1916, there was a great enthusiasm from Turks. The loss of the British and French allied forces, including the captives and the wounded, was more than 250,000, and that of the Turkish side close to 250,000 in total. It should be noted that those who joined the army as volunteers had no written record, and they are not included in this number. As a British general stated, the greatest damage the British made at the Dardanelles was martyring lots of learned young Turkish men. It was a great loss for the future of Turkey. The nation, which longed for a victory, had restored its confidence. The confidence which would inspire people. The determination they needed for the war of independence was gained. The nation recognized the commanders who carried them to victory in the Dardanelles, Mustafa Kemal being the first. As for the commanders, the Dardanelles was an important experience for them. The people of Anatolia had seen what they could do when they gathered together for a common purpose. The Russian Empire, which had lasted for a few centuries, collapsed, and the way for the freedom of Central Asian republics was opened. Captive nations witnessed the British and the French, which were thought to be invincible, flee, and they gained confidence for a war of independence. We wish that the victory of Dardanelles will not be forgotten.